Shalom, family and friends. Just a few thoughts on Christianity and minimalism. When I was in Korea, my first year, I met a Buddhist and we were talking about computers, and he said, "Why do you need a computer? You're a Christian." And it made me think, well, to communicate, from multimedia and stuff, and surfing the web. And he told me that I should live a more spiritual life. And it's interesting what you can learn from people of other religions. I've definitely learned from Buddhists. I don't subscribe to their philosophy, but I think there is some aspects of their lifestyle that we could perhaps learn something from. So one aspect might be minimalism. So what is minimalism? It's the idea of doing with less. So let's look at the Bible and see if the Bible talks about that subject. I'm going to take from some various versions of the Bible. Like I said in my previous video, I prefer the King James Bible, but for the sake of the audience, some of which might not be very familiar with that kind of literature, I'm just going to use a simple version here. So this is on treasures in heaven. Don't store up treasures on earth. Moss and rust can destroy them, and thieves can break in and steal them. Instead, store up your treasures in heaven, where moss and rust cannot destroy them, and thieves cannot break in and steal them. Your heart will always be where your treasure is. That's Matthew 6:19-21. Growing up in a first world country, Canada, the world that we live in is materialistic, and there's a lot of emphasis to study hard, to work hard, to save up and make a lot of money and be successful. And it's a lot of our dreams. It's what we learn on TV, it's what we learn in the culture. So to shift from that perspective to storing up treasures in heaven is quite a fundamental change. And it's something that I've been trying to work on and still have a long way to go. Even though I'm not wealthy by any means, I still have aspects of that culture in my life, and I still have dreams and desires. So I'm trying to draw closer to God to discard some of that. Let's continue on to another passage here. Just like Jesus warned the crowds, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. That's Luke 12:15. And then he goes on to tell them the parable of the rich man who had an abundant harvest. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and then I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." And I agree with that passage. There are times in my life where I had a certain amount of wealth and I had choices of what to do with it. And I can tell you, every time that I have put God first with that money, or I have been charitable with that money and used it for His purposes, I've always had it come back to me abundantly. It just seems to be an economic principle in the kingdom of God that when we invest in God's kingdom, we get some kind of benefit out of it. And it's just been proved true again and again in my life. So God is faithful to give us out of our generosity, out of our commitment, and not just with money, but with time and effort too. But if we do the opposite, if we just live selfishly, live for ourselves, live materialistically like non-Christians, which might be wise. Like you look at people like Bill Gates, who are very wealthy and astute in business. There's a benefit to that, but also comes with that a lot of times certain level of ruthlessness in order to achieve that level. So I think there's kind of a trade-off of where do we give and where do we take. So let's move on a little bit here. See the birds of the sky. They don't sow, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. Your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you of much more value than they? That's Matthew 6:26. So we spend so much of our life worrying about the future, worrying about our education, worrying about our next job, our career, worrying about our retirement and savings and stocks or whatever investments we have, worrying about the mortgage, worrying about whatever possessions we need, new car, whatever it might be. But I want to let you consider a different way of thinking. Instead of thinking about just yourself first, why don't you think of how can I serve God first and see if God will take care of all the other things. For a number of years, I've watched this broadcast called True News by Rick Wiles in Florida in the United States, originally from Texas. And that ministry was founded on, charity and just obeying God. And God gave Rick a vision about what was coming to America in the future and the Western world, and eventually globally. And so he served God trying to warn people about the end times. And he also spent efforts to do charity to orphans in poor countries and across the world. And he's done a lot of good. And so I've supported that ministry because I've seen how much work they've done and how successful they've been in sharing the love of God. And whenever I've given to them, I've always seen a benefit come out of it. Now, I'm not saying it will always be a financial benefit, but I've definitely seen benefit in my life. And so I encourage any of you who are considering, donating money to charitable causes, look into True News, look into Bless an Orphan, the charity that they support. I believe it's South or Central America. And just look for real ministries that need help in whatever small way you can. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but it's just a part of you that you're giving, your time, your effort. And for some of you, maybe you don't have money to give, maybe time in some ministry in church or just helping the poor, neighbors, family, friends, right? But going back to the topic of minimalism, got to stay on topic here. Proverbs 16:8, it is better to be honest and poor than to be dishonest and rich. Sadly, it seems sometimes we have to make a choice between wealth and some of the more spiritual values. Now, I'm not saying you can't be a good Christian and be wealthy. It just seems that the people who are at the top of the wealth spectrum in the world, they have to make a lot more compromises to get there. Now, they may have been blessed, maybe out of birth or where they came from or their talents that were God-given to achieve to that level. But, many times it's compromise that brings people to that point, and stinginess. And now, ironically, a lot of people who are generous, they still are bountiful. They have a lot of good things. So I think you can have a certain degree of wealth just by being generous and giving. And I encourage those that do that regularly, and I, I respect that. One more passage to go through on the topic. 1 John 2:15-17. Don't love the world or anything that belongs to the world. Yeah, that's pretty pretty harsh right there. Let's continue on. If you love the world, you cannot love the Father. Our foolish pride comes from this world, and so does our selfish desires and our desire to have everything we see. None of this comes from the Father. The world and the desires it causes are disappearing, but if we obey God, we will live forever. I think that as this pandemic has been progressing, we've had this economic depression that's been hitting globally, and people are losing their wealth. People are losing their livelihoods. Their businesses are failing or just going downhill. And a lot of people are out of work. And we are losing that pride of life. We are being humbled by God. We are seeking God's face now more than ever because we have nowhere to look but up. And I've been at that point many times in my life. So I'm thankful that God did not place me too high on the spectrum that I couldn't see what was wrong with me. And I know it takes a lot of character to have great wealth and use it responsibly. So, do we all need to be minimalists as Christians? I don't think so. But maybe we can downsize a little bit in how we live and look at our neighbors, look at our neighborhood, see the poor down the street, see the poor in the community, see what you can do for them. And maybe it's globally too. I came to Asia to look for work, but I also wanted to contribute. And here in Vietnam, I volunteer and in a family business owned by my wife. And we try to offer a really good deal for the kids here, some of which couldn't afford this kind of education normally. Others are a little bit more well off, but they still get a good deal. And just being in this country, that's developing, we're seeing everything change right before our eyes. And so we have decided to become a little bit lower so they can become greater. And I think that's what Jesus would want. So I encourage you to do the same, whatever that means for your life. You live in a different country, maybe you have a different lifestyle, you have different standards, and that's okay. But we can all be a little bit more minimalist in how we live and not think about personal ambition so much, not think about our goals, not think about our dreams. Just be empty and let God fill us. And I think as Christians, we will be much more satisfied. We will be much more capable. We will be much more effective in everything. Even perhaps we'll be better off financially, because a lot of times people, they lose money because they're so focused on it. So anyways, thank you guys for bearing with me through the speech. I just wanted to share my experiences in this, and I hope that you can find a way to live simply as a Christian and to just show love and not get caught up in the world, because things are getting crazier, and we want to live holy spiritual lives so that we can bring others to see God's love. You have a great time. Bye.